The moment the clock struck 8 a.m., something snapped inside the royal machine, and what followed wasn't just drama, it was a full-blown exposure of a silent war that had been brewing for years. A war where titles became currency, loyalty became leverage, and one explosive Australian trip turned into the final trigger that forced the monarchy to draw a line so sharp it cut straight through blood itself. And suddenly, nothing felt private anymore. Not the whispers, not the deals, not even the carefully polished image that had been sold to the world for decades. Because at 10:30 p.m., while most of the world slept, something else woke up. A petition. Yes, but not just any petition. One that surged past 100,000 furious voices, each signature like a verdict, each click like a public rejection. And the message wasn't subtle, it was brutal. Australia had turned completely, and then the numbers started to sting. $3,200, not for a product, not for a service, but for proximity, for access, for the illusion of royalty packaged as an experience. And that's where the whispers started getting louder. Was this influence or exploitation? Was this empowerment or a carefully designed monetization of something that was never meant to be sold? Because critics weren't just criticizing anymore, they were connecting dots, dangerous dots, drawing parallels to past scandals, but this time with a twist that felt colder, sharper, more deliberate. Not chaos, strategy. Then came the moment that changed everything. 5 a.m. A conversation that wasn't meant to echo, but it did. A statement that wasn't meant for cameras, but somehow it became the loudest line in the entire story. The monarchy is not a billboard for hire. And just like that, the tone shifted. This wasn't concern anymore. This was confrontation. The quiet diplomacy was gone, replaced by something colder. Direct communication. A message delivered with surgical precision. This is not a royal tour. This is private. Commercial. Separate. The kind of words that don't just clarify, they isolate. And the impact? Immediate. Sponsors started stepping back. Carefully at first, deals that once looked glamorous suddenly looked radioactive. Nobody wanted to be associated with a label that had now gone public grifter. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because while one side was preparing luxury retreats, manifestation sessions, curated experiences, the other side was sitting in rooms discussing housing crises, cost of living, real problems. Two worlds. Same family. Completely different realities, and people noticed. They always do. The contrast didn't just exist, it screamed. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was collapse in motion. The narrative had flipped completely. What was supposed to be a comeback was now being dissected as a miscalculation, a misread of public sentiment, a dangerous assumption that the title still held the same untouchable power it once did. But something had changed, and the public wasn't playing along anymore. Another conversation, another layer peeled back. Calm voice, steel underneath. This isn't about family. That line didn't just land, it echoed. Because when family is removed from the equation, what's left is something far more ruthless. Legacy, survival, control. The consequences were no longer theoretical. Sponsors gone, funding collapsing. The numbers didn't lie. Over 60% vanished. Just like that. And suddenly the question wasn't whether this would succeed, it was how fast it would fall. Not a public statement, not a press release. Just a quiet remark that felt heavier than everything else combined. Legacy is not a product. And that's when it became clear this wasn't just damage control. This was a reset, a recalibration of what the crown would allow and what it wouldn't. Because beneath all the headlines, all the outrage, all the speculation, there's a deeper question no one can ignore anymore. Where does royalty end and where does business begin? And what happens when that line disappears completely? And maybe that's the real story here. Not the retreat, not the petition, not even the money. But the moment the illusion cracked and everyone saw what was hiding behind it, and just when it felt like the situation couldn't spiral any further and what unfolded next didn't just deepen the crisis, it sealed it. Because the one thing nobody expected to become the breaking point suddenly became the most devastating reality of all: the bill. Not a symbolic cost, not a reputational cost, a real crushing multi-million-dollar security bill that no government would touch, not a single dollar of public funding, not a single layer of royal protection, just a cold financial truth dropped into the middle of an already collapsing narrative, and in that moment, the illusion of influence collided head-on with the reality of consequence. Because here's the part that makes the silence feel loud: the same title that once opened doors, funded tours, and commanded global attention was now being treated like a liability, a risk, something that needed distance rather than association, and that shift didn't happen gradually, it snapped into place instantly, publicly, irreversibly. The Australian government didn't hesitate, didn't soften the message, didn't leave room for interpretation. This is private. This is commercial. You pay for it. And just like that, the dream of operating in that blurred space between royalty and celebrity didn't just weaken, it collapsed. The kind of moment that doesn't look dramatic on the surface, but carries a weight that reshapes everything underneath it. A quiet consultation, a conversation that didn't need cameras because its consequences would speak louder than any broadcast ever could, and from that room came something. Sharper than any public statement, a directive that cut through the last remaining thread connecting status to profit. Titles are not for sale, not for branding, not for lifestyle empires, not for curated experiences wrapped in exclusivity. But the real shock wasn't just the decision, it was the timing. Because this didn't come after months of debate, after years of negotiation, after endless warnings. No, this came in hours. A rapid, almost surgical dismantling of an entire strategy that had been built on the assumption that the system would hesitate, that the institution would bend, that the line would stay blurred just long enough to make it work. But instead, the line was redrawn overnight, and it wasn't subtle. It was absolute. The numbers told a story that no amount of branding could spin. Millions lost. Sponsors gone. Partnerships paused. Deals evaporating before they even had the chance to be announced. And somewhere in the middle of that financial freefall was a realization that no one could ignore anymore. The title wasn't protecting the business was now damaging the title. And then the whisper started turning into something louder, something colder, something far more permanent. Hollywood hesitation. Brands pulling back. Conversations going quiet. Because reputation doesn't collapse all at once, it fractures piece by piece until suddenly there's nothing left holding it together. And that word, the one that started as a murmur, the one that people thought would stay contained to comment sections and online debates, had now crossed over into something official, something documented, something signed by over 100,000 people. Grifter. And once a label like that sticks, it doesn't just fade away. It lingers. It follows. It reshapes perception in ways that are almost impossible to reverse. By 7:45 p.m., another conversation surfaced, another glimpse behind the curtain, and this one didn't just explain what was happening, it revealed why. Because at the center of all this wasn't anger, wasn't revenge, wasn't even conflict. It was control. Control over what the monarchy represents. Control over how far its identity can be stretched before it breaks. And the message that came out of that moment was chilling in its clarity. The boundary between service and celebrity is no longer negotiable. It's a wall. And once that wall goes up, there's no stepping back through it. And that's when the emotional weight of the situation truly hit. Because this wasn't just about money or image or strategy anymore. This was about identity, about belonging, about the realization that something once considered permanent had become conditional. And that condition had now been enforced, not privately, not quietly, but in front of the entire world. The financial analysts had done their calculations, and the numbers were staggering, not just in terms of immediate losses, but in terms of future impact, long-term damage, opportunities that would never materialize because the risk now outweighed the reward. And that's the kind of damage you can't fix with a statement, can't smooth over with a rebrand, can't recover from overnight. But maybe the most unsettling part of this entire unraveling is what came next. The confirmation that what happened wasn't temporary. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a moment of pressure meant to force a course correction. It was a precedent, a new rule, a line drawn so clearly that it reshapes not just one situation, but every situation that might follow it. Because once the system proves it can act this decisively, this quickly, this publicly, it changes the entire game. And that leaves one final question hanging in the air, heavier than everything that came before it. Was this always inevitable? Was this outcome quietly building for years while everyone was distracted by the headlines, the interviews, the carefully crafted narratives? Or did something shift in this exact moment? Something that forced the institution to finally act in a way it had been avoiding for far too long. Because as the night settles in and the headlines start to freeze into history, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The story isn't actually over, not even close. The fallout is still unfolding. The consequences are still spreading. And somewhere behind closed doors, decisions are still being made that could push this even further.